His thoughts continued to race and his heart to pound. Was that fear he was feeling? From now on, Hanio could not afford to let down his defences. The matter was put to rest for that evening, but thereafter relations with Reiko became extremely strained. He now felt wary whenever she offered him anything to eat or drink. "There's no poison in it," Reiko would say, teasingly. "I already tested it." She had become very wary that Hanio might try to run away. Even as she joked about poison, there was pure toxicity in the mere look of her eyes. The woman who had once spoken of gentle, childlike things was nowhere to be seen. Her every word was laced with contempt. Nothing matters more than your precious life, does it? What if you caught a cold? It would be a complete disaster. Well, I guess I'll just have to let you live to a ripe old age. I wonder if I should get a Pomeranian dog. I don't feel safe somehow. If anything happened, you certainly wouldn't be the knight in shining armour to come and rescue me. You're a bundle of nerves every time we have a meal. It's unbearable. Maybe I should stir something extra nutritious into your food." Whenever he left the house, she would accompany him, and every time she went out, he would be dragged along. Reiko began to abuse sleeping pills. Her taste in fashion became ever more outlandish, and she devised one eccentric outfit after another. Taking her cue from paper lanterns, she created a paper dress that stuck out around her in a lantern shape. She would take Hanio out to dance at go-go bars, and once, when the dancing was in full flow, she called out, "I'm a paper lantern. I'm full of fire inside. Rip me up, I say." The boys tore off her lantern outfit, and she did a crazy dance, dressed in nothing but a bright red petticoat. When she was outrageously high, Hanio would look for an opportunity to escape. But this was precisely the time when her intuition became exceptionally acute. "Where are you off to?" She would stand firmly in his way. Even when he went to the toilet, she would be waiting outside the door. As Reiko had noted previously, drugs gave her the ability to have premonitions and predict how things would turn out. "You're going to try and make a getaway tonight, aren't you? Well, I'm not going to let you go. I know perfectly well you've sewn all your bank savings into your waistband so you can make off at any time. You keep it on even when you're in bed. Coward, thinking of nothing but yourself all the time." As they danced to the frantic disco beat, she would continue to bawl right into Hanio's face. "Cheapskate, if you try to leave me, I'll kill you, so if you want to live, you'd better stay right where you are. So what do you think? I've finally gone insane, haven't I? I never realized how much fun insanity would be. But now I do. I wish I'd gone mad earlier." One particular evening at the disco, Reiko asked him to accompany her to the ladies' room. She did not feel at all well. He could hardly refuse, but then another female customer made a fuss and complained to management. The manager took him by the neck and threw him out. This was Hanio's last chance. Like a shot, he took off into the dark streets. He made a point of sticking to the maze of little alleyways, doing his best to follow an unpredictable route. Running would raise suspicions, and there were few taxis around at that time. He feared it would take too long to get bogged down in negotiations with a taxi driver, so his only option was to keep walking and not to stop. Every moment was fraught with danger. In his desperation to find a place of safety, he followed any road that presented itself. He lost himself in one house-lined street after another, passed from one bright, neon-lit alley to the next, stepped on the bodies of sewer rats, and pushed aside streetwalkers who tugged at his sleeve. Suddenly, he emerged into a dark, dismal section of the city in which quiet houses with low eaves huddled together under a railway bridge. Mounds of rubbish lined the embankment. The road was unpaved. In the gloom, he could make out the scattered forms of large stones left behind after construction work. Hanio suddenly realized that he'd been concentrating on nothing else but walking. Wiping his sweaty forehead with a handkerchief, he slowed his pace a little and was about to turn into a side street when he became aware of someone stealthily pursuing him. The footsteps picked up when Hanio increased his pace and stopped when he stopped. He glanced back, but could see no one. Yet when he walked faster, the footsteps still pursued him. Hanio thought it through. Perhaps it was his own footsteps that unsettled him. He decided to ignore them. A little further on, he saw he was approaching a brightly lit shopping street. He had chosen to stick to dark areas, but now he was desperate to come out into the light. He quickened his pace, but suddenly felt a sharp sting in his thigh. That couldn't be a mosquito bite, not at this time of the year. The pain ceased immediately, so he pressed forward and finally emerged, with some relief, into the broad, well-lit road. Naturally, the shops were all closed. It was the usual kind of street, with a brilliantly lit archway over the road, shop signs and display windows illuminated for no one's benefit, and a cacophony of traffic. Just before an alley on the opposite side, Hanio saw a paper lantern advertising the presence of a hotel in white lettering. Stay, 850, yen, rest, 300 yen. Making sure that the coast was clear, he crossed the road, checked again, and entered the alley. The Merciful Light Inn, a small establishment, was clearly a love hotel. How this solitary establishment had ended up in a place like this, he had no idea. In the entrance was a dim, spherical light, covered with insects, whose very bodies, as they clustered around it, spoke of the ephemeral. He opened the glass door, but there was no one at reception. A sign read, "If no one available, please ring bell." Under it was the cracked yellow button. Hanio pressed. He heard a soft ringing somewhere within the building. Then, moments later, the sound of someone stumbling, dropping something, and muttering. A bout of coughing. A tiny old woman appeared. "So, you want an all-night stay?" She stared right at him with her beady eyes. "Yes. Is there a room available?" Hanio knew the answer would be yes, but he made a show of being polite. "None of the good ones, unfortunately. We do a roaring trade here, despite the downturn in the economy. We offer only basic amenities, no air conditioning or anything like that, yet still the customers come, even in high summer. I suppose we're a bit out of the way, so people feel at ease. It's the same attitude people have toward pawnbrokers." Hanio understood instantly that the hotel offered peep shows. From the way she had so pointedly mentioned good rooms, he was sure she was angling to squeeze 5,000 yen out of him and lead him to a booth with a little peephole. Well, she was good with words, he had to give her that. The way she hinted at the special service they provided, by suggesting they could still pull in customers during summer, even without air conditioning, was a stroke of genius. Hanio was curt. "A bad room will do, so that'll be 800 for the night." Her expression hardened discernibly, as if a door had been closed. She led him up to a tiny, cupboard-like room toward the rear of the first floor and took the 800 yen. "You'll find the mattress and bedding inside the cupboard. Lay it out when you want to sleep." With that, she turned and descended the creaking stairs. It didn't look as though he would be getting any tea. Exhausted, longing to lie down, Hanio wondered if he should ask her politely to lay out the bed. But the very thought of those beady eyes stopped him. The small, narrow room shook with the vibration of the traffic, so loud that it seemed almost to be inside the hotel. He listened to the roaring sea that was the city at night. Down the corridor, a woman cried out. But her cries were followed by a succession of silken moans, so Hanio decided not to concern himself about it. He caught a faint smell of the toilet. On the other side of this ceiling was a starry sky enveloped in smog. As Hanio lay with arm on pillow and looking up at the rain-blotched ceiling, he sensed the design of the Almighty. The same vast starry sky that hung over the ceiling of a great convention hall, replete with glittering chandeliers, also hung over the ceiling of this dismal grey hotel. Beneath the sky, wretched loneliness was no jot better or worse than good fortune and success. To put it another way, wherever you stood, the same starry sky was peering down. He knew that to be true. And that was precisely the reason why the meaninglessness of his own life connected directly with the starry sky. Hidden away in this flophouse, Hanio had become, you might say, a prince of stars. He pulled the musty mattress from the cupboard and laid it on the floor. He had a strong urge to lie down just as he was, but he felt the need, at least, to get out of his trousers, so he quickly yanked them off. Hanio felt a smart pain shoot through his thigh. A tiny splinter seemed to have lodged in his skin through his trousers, but he couldn't locate it. Using the light of the lamp, he finally spied a broken fragment of the splinter buried darkly in his skin. There was no blood, but it ached a little. Try as he might, he found it impossible to sleep. He kept being assailed by a vision of Reiko's face staring right at him, her hands groping around inside an ant-house. She picked out 2 or 3 ants and sprinkled them on his face. The dull pain in his thigh seemed to have made him feverish. His entire thigh felt hot and heavy, and a good night's sleep eluded him all the more. He checked out of the Merciful Light Inn early next morning and dragged his aching leg around in search of a pharmacy already open for business. The store that he found gave him ointment and antibiotics without even requiring to view his wound. Hanio applied a quick dressing in a nearby coffee shop. He felt a little lighter in himself. It struck him that, in view of the circumstances, the best way to avoid detection was probably to live as a wealthy guest in a big hotel. He decided he should purchase some luxury travel bags and presentable ready-made clothes. All he had to do was to wait for the bank to open. When he got into his room in the Key Hotel, it was nearly midday. The room had a nice outlook, and he stretched out on the soft double bed, hoping to recover from the previous night's lack of sleep. The leg pain seemed to have improved a little. Thinking he might apply more ointment, he examined his thigh in the light coming through the window. It was a beautiful May day. A light scattering of clouds could be seen over the motorway, along which a stream of cars, minis mostly, by the look of things, sped quietly. Finally, he was able to step back a little and see things more clearly. His absurd delusion that someone was after him was due to Reiko. But then a single thought came back and would not let go. That photo Reiko said she saw. Where did it come from? Why would a portrait of him get passed around? The fact that such a matter even bothered Hanio surely proved that life was dear to him. Why should anything worry him if he had no concern for his life? But was refusing to put his own death in the hands of another really the same as being attached to life? Quietly, in the bright light, Hanio examined his naked thigh close up. He wiped away the remnants of the ointment and scrutinized what was left of the splinter. For a splinter, it had a strangely precise shape. Its blackness was more reminiscent of wire than dark woody fibre. It seemed thicker and more of a spindle shape than he remembered. It had gone in quite deeply, apparently. No wonder it was festering. He racked his brains, but could not think how he might have picked the splinter up. During his attempt to avoid those footsteps, he had hidden himself among garbage bins. Maybe he'd been pierced by some wire at that point. No, it almost certainly had to have been while he was walking. But how odd to get a splinter just then. On further thought, he seemed to remember hearing a whooshing sound like a shuttlecock cutting through the air when the splinter pierced him, but he couldn't be sure now if he'd imagined it. Hanio burst out laughing. Here he was, worrying himself to the bone. What a complete neurotic he had become. And yet he had not felt the slightest concern when the blood was being sucked out of him every day by the vampire woman. Come to think of it, he remembered something he had learned long ago, but had subsequently forgotten, that living and worrying were one and the same thing. Perhaps this was evidence that he had got his life back, and he just hadn't realized it until now. If the wound gets worse, I'll see a doctor, he promised himself. He applied some ointment, took his antibiotics, and eventually fell into a pleasant sleep. When he awoke, it was dark all around him. He was hungry and about to go down to the restaurant, but the thought of drawing any attention put him off the idea. He was afraid of something, that was for sure. He could just see himself going out there, on show to all and sundry. He worried about his fear becoming public. Why not have his meal in his room, without fear and just the way he liked it? He wouldn't have to worry about others. And he had money to spare. He used room service to order a tenderloin steak, a Waldorf salad, and a bottle of wine. When he saw the steward enter his room, pushing his creaky cart, Hanio couldn't help stealing a look at his face. Tall, and probably rather snooty, the steward had clearly just spent a lot of effort squeezing blackheads. But his unprepossessing appearance was no proof that he was unconnected to any organization. Everyone affiliated to an organization conspires to kill those who exist in complete isolation. The meal and wine were delightful. He watched television until late, but then found it really hard to get to sleep. His afternoon doze came back to curse him. Staring at the grey, flickering static on the TV, once the programs had run their course, he got a sudden premonition that the face of Ruriko, or Reiko, or the vampire woman was going suddenly to emerge and start talking to him. But the flickering grey sand on the screen never changed. Around 2 a.m, finally a yawn. This encouraged him to go to bed, but just as he was on his way to the bathroom, there was a discreet knock at the door. A client, Hanio thought immediately. But how could a client find a way here to purchase his life? For one thing, he'd cancelled the newspaper ad ages ago, and he'd checked in under an alias, so how would anyone know his whereabouts? Who was it then? Another knock, this time a bit louder. Hanio took the plunge and threw open the door. In the corridor was a man in a raincoat and a felt hat. "Who are you?" Hanio said. "Are you Mr. Tanaka?" the man asked. He had a thick, viscous voice. "No, I'm not. Sorry to have troubled you." But there was a toneless quality to his voice. In fact, he did not seem the least bit sorry. Hanio watched as the man turned on his heel and went off down the corridor. Once he'd shut the door, he could feel his heart racing. Why ask the question and then just walk off? There's something fishy going on. They must have tracked me down. I need to move to another hotel tomorrow. Brooding, he locked the door and got ready for bed. But there was no way he could sleep now. The pain in his leg was bothering him less. But he couldn't get out of his head the thought that the man might be loitering in the corridor outside his room. How fearless, utterly fearless he had felt when he first put his life up for sale. But now a warm, furry fear clung to his chest, digging its claws right in, like lying in bed with a cat in his arms. Hanio checked out first thing next morning, carrying nothing but an empty bag, and hid himself in another major hotel. He had no urge to go into town, so he lolled around all day in front of the TV. With no exercise, he didn't even get hungry. As night deepened and the hotel became quieter, anxiety settled thickly on his mind. He wanted to flee, but no matter how far he fled, he felt certain that those unaccountable footsteps would come in pursuit. For the first time in a long while, Hanio felt a sense of anticipation. In the past, when waiting for clients to turn up and buy his life, he would put aside all normal concerns with time and regular life and remain untroubled. But now he was feeling anxious about something he could not quite put his finger on. It was like dealing with a new lover. He had never before sensed that the future might embody something important and substantial. 2 a.m. The corridor could well have belonged to a hospital, leading to a morgue. He opened the door a crack and peered out to make sure it was clear. A solitary red leather chair opposite the elevator gleamed dully under a sconce. It came as no surprise when, at 2:30, there was another knock on the door. And when Hanio failed to answer, another knock. After much hesitation, Hanio finally opened the door. A short, stout man in a striped suit stood before him. A different man from the one the previous night. "Who are you? Are you Mr. Ueno?" "No, I'm not." "Sorry to have troubled you." The man bowed politely and walked off calmly in the direction of the elevator. Hanio locked the door and returned to bed. His chest was pounding. Just then, pain ran through his thigh again. Hanio had a sudden flash of inspiration. "Of course! Damn! That's what it is!" Using the lamplight to locate his wound, he wiped it clean of ointment and touched it with his finger. Then, bending his body, he placed his ear against it. An almost imperceptible vibration was coming from the black splinter left in him. Someone had fired an exquisitely small mini-transceiver into his thigh. Which meant that, wherever he fled, they would find him. He made an attempt to gouge it out with his nails, but it was too deeply embedded. He took a moment then to work out a strategy. "Okay, maybe I shouldn't try to remove it now. Clearly it's already sent a signal to my adversaries, saying where I am. That's why they came to check. I should take it out when I leave in the morning and then go to ground. No doubt I'll need to go to the hospital, but I'd rather that than have it taken out by a doctor and blow my cover. I'll do it myself and get treated afterward." Sleep came easily to him once he'd worked out his plan. The ordinary knife that arrived at his room with breakfast the next morning was not up to the job, he decided, so he ordered a steak despite having no appetite for it. Hanio heated the steak knife's sharp blade with the flame of a match, then dug it into his own thigh. He stuck the blade in, gave it a flick-up, and a tiny steel wire popped out along with a gush of blood. The doctor examined the wound in Hanio's thigh and frowned. He was young, with a self-confident manner, and a long nose that gave him a supercilious look. "How on earth did you get this wound? It looks like the flesh has been gouged out with a sharp tool. If this was done in a fight, I need to report it to the police." "You're right. My flesh has been gouged out, but I did it myself." "So what happened?" "I caught my leg on a rusty old nail. I was worried I might get tetanus." "A bit of an overreaction, I would say. You amateurs—" The doctor asked nothing more. He lined up the sutures, then injected Hanio with a local anaesthetic. The injection was painful, but the thought that they would have no idea of where he was provided an indescribable sense of relief. This place was all white walls, shelves lined with scalpels, and metal basins full of antiseptic, without a shred of comfort on offer. But the certainty that his whereabouts were unknown was comfort enough. Hanio closed his eyes. The pain had gone completely. The sensation was as if someone were stitching together two stiff pieces of leather over his wounded thigh. He left with instructions to return 1 week later to have the stitches removed. It was unlikely that he would come back here, he thought. He could drop into any old clinic to get the job done. As might be expected, Hanio kept to the shadows under the eaves. It was a new habit for him. Whenever he emerged into the light, he would keep a lookout for anyone tailing him. He took particular care at corners. Where should he go? First thing was to get out of Tokyo. No use lying to himself anymore. It was the fear of death that was driving him now. Nothing is safer than not even knowing your destination yourself. The anaesthetic was wearing off. He dragged his aching leg as far as Ikebukuro, and then looked around various counters in Sadip department store. The menswear fashions, shirts, the fridges, rattan blinds, fans, and air conditioners all suggested that, even before the June rainy season had begun, Spring had had its day, and it was already almost summer. The huge number of products spoke of compact little families in their compact little houses where these goods would ultimately end up. The thought almost suffocated him. Why are people so desperate to live? Isn't it unnatural that people who have not even been exposed to the danger of death should feel a desire to live? It was only people like himself who should have the right to cherish such a desire. Boarding a Seibu Line train with no destination in mind, Hanio found himself captivated by the view of fields in the suburbs. He had the odd feeling that the passengers were all pretending not to know him, even though they did. A young man who looked like a member of some radical students' group, a schoolgirl dressed in a beautiful traditional kimono, a middle-aged man with a square-set physique who looked as if he might once have served as a non-commissioned army officer. There they stood, hanging onto their straps, stealing looks at him. They might have been checking portraits of criminals on wanted posters you find pasted up in front of a police station. That's him there. I'll pretend not to notice now, but I'll inform the station staff later when I get off at the next stop. They seemed to have detected in Hanio's face the hint of an enmity toward society. The warm air of May mingled with the odour of people's bodies in the carriage, bringing home to him for the first time in ages the unbearable smell of communal living. He wanted to live, that was now certain. But could someone who had once managed to escape society's clutches find the courage to commit himself again to that pungent stench? Society operates smoothly precisely because people remain unaware of their own smell. The student's stinking socks that haven't been washed in a week, the sweet underarm odour of a schoolgirl, and her distinctively world-weary, virginal scent, the middle-aged man who reeks like a chimney covered in soot. People never hold back when it comes to giving off their own scents. Hanio liked to think he produced no smell or odour, but he could not be certain. He bought a ticket to Hano, which was the end of the line, so he could alight wherever the fancy took him, but he became anxious again that someone might be following him. He suspected that if he were suddenly to make a show of getting off at a station, someone would come hurrying after him. To test this out, he made a dash to the doors a second before they were about to close, but he stopped in his tracks without getting off. A thin man sporting a wispy beard had been trying to scramble off behind him, but, his way suddenly blocked, he missed his chance and the doors closed in his face. All the way to the next station, the man stared hard and long at Hanio. Though Hanio found this very annoying, he took great comfort in the fact that he was being stared at with such naked animosity. At Hanno, Hanio was relieved when the passengers who got off with him all went their own separate ways. He walked to the quiet square in front of the station, where he noticed a large map displaying hiking routes. He was too exhausted even to think about any more walking, however. Not far away from him was a seedy-looking inn. All Hanio had to do was to stand at the entrance in his smart clothes for them to come out and guide him to a room. He opened the round window in the room and whiled away the time, gazing at the sky until the evening. What a flat, thoroughly matter-of-fact town Hanno was. The blueness of the sky quietly faded as evening encroached, and then he noticed a spider dropping down rapidly from the top of the window. The spider stopped in front of Hanio's eyes, its single thread of silk glittering in the evening light. The spider was tiny. It was hard to make out clearly, but what looked like a black scrap of yarn rolled into a ball dangled from the end of the thread. The ball reminded him of silkworm gut. The sight was unpleasant, but Hanio couldn't tear his eyes away. The spider started to sway on its thread, back and forth, as if it had decided to put on a circus display. Think you can impress me? Hanio thought, idly. Next moment, the swinging grew violent, and the spider began to grow in size before his ease. It also seemed to be changing into something else. It was now an axe with a sharp blade. The thread turned into a thick, sparkling, silvery web. The axe made a cutting sound through the air, aiming straight for Hanio's face. There was a white glint to its blade. Hanio fell back onto the tatami floor, his hands covering his face. When he came to, there was no sign of the spider. A faint 3-day moon floated in the center of the round window. Perhaps he had mistaken the crescent moon for the blade of an axe. "They're even screwing with my head." Terrified, he suddenly recalled Reiko's illness. But after that, nothing happened. Hanio went out several times to get to know his new neighborhood, but there was really nothing worth seeing in the streets. A manufacturer of wooden bathtubs, an old-fashioned confectioner's shop with overhanging eaves on a wide road whose beauty had otherwise been destroyed by extensive redevelopment. Row after row of insignificant homes surrounded by hedges. It looked like the sort of town inhabited by truly apathetic people. Surprisingly, he found that comforting. One evening, he was strolling through one of these completely deserted parts of town. He approached a small raised level crossing in the road when a truck suddenly came hurtling toward him across the track. As it came his way, it looked menacingly huge, but Hanio found himself gazing at it with a sense of awe. Framed against the dusty evening sky, it reminded him of one of those kabuto helmets worn by savage tribes in ancient times. The truck bounced over the track and came straight toward him as he stood on the wide, empty road. Was this a bad dream, he thought, and jumped out of its way. He fled to the other side of the road, but the truck turned toward him. There were no shops around into which he could dive and seek assistance, just long, expressionless lines of hedges and modest wooden fences. Whether he fled to the left or right, the truck pursued him, as if hunting a human, just for the fun of it. He could see the faint reflection of clouds in the windshield, inundated with evening sky. It was impossible to make out the driver's face. Without waiting to read the license plate, Hanio escaped into a little lane that branched off the road. Surely the truck would not be able to follow him up here. He slowed down and gradually edged further into the narrow lane. But the truck still pursued him. Hanio found himself trapped against an old, stone-pillared gateway with its doors firmly shut. There was no way out. The truck pressed up to him to within an inch of his nose. Then suddenly it went into reverse and withdrew from the lane like a steely black, roiling wave. Hanio's heart beat crazily, and he had to crouch down. That time when he collapsed with anemia while walking with the vampire, he had experienced the most exquisite sense of loss. But this was different. A terror that he had never tasted before. Hanio did not want to go back to his inn. Their dinners were nothing to get excited about. Not even Hanno offered a safe haven for him. After making sure the truck had truly disappeared, Hanio decided to venture into the brightly lit shopping arcade, so he cautiously stepped back onto the broad, dusty, excessively manicured streets. But now lots of people seemed to be walking around. Where could they have come from? And this actually made him feel even more uneasy. To describe it as a shopping arcade was stretching it. It was little more than a series of shops on the outskirts of town. One particularly soulless store had a dingy display window filled with nothing but great mounds of sports shoes. The countless shoes looked as if they had been collected from deceased inmates of an internment camp. They were crushed out of shape, with their rubber soles and limp, dangling laces pressed against the glass. There were piles and piles of them. It wasn't all bad. Street lamps dotted the whole town, and crowds of people gathered before brightly lit shops selling fresh vegetables and fish. Hanio heard a familiar old humming. It sounded like a honeybee. It was musical, it had warmth, and it conveyed an indescribable hint of nostalgia. The sound was emanating from a small sawmill workshop. Through the half-open door he could see brightly coloured wood shavings and the faint gleam of a round electric saw. On the wooden door was a sign, "From small boxes to bookshelves, woodwork products made to order on the spot." He gave it a brief thought, then moved on to a watch shop. There was absolutely nothing chic or modern about this place. It was the sort of shop that belonged to a completely bygone age. Hanio entered without hesitating. "I'm looking for a watch." "Of course. We're a watch shop after all. What kind are you looking for?" A woman, evidently the owner, had come out. She had a white, puffy face. "I'd like to buy a stopwatch, the loudest one you have." "Let me check our stock." Hanio purchased a traditional old stopwatch. It would not have been out of place at a Meiji-era sporting event. He did not recognize the manufacturer. When he pressed the button on top, the second hand gave off a steady, jarringly assertive sound. With his newly acquired purchase, he went back to the sawmill he had seen earlier. "Would you be able to make a small box? I need it right away." "No problem. You've caught me at a good moment," replied the thin, rather age-worn man, the very image of a carpenter, without even looking up. "Please make me a box for this stopwatch. It's extremely urgent." "Wait, is it a gift box you're thinking of? They ought to have had one of those at the watch shop." "No, I want a special kind of box. One that doesn't give any indication of what's inside. A big one, please, in as simple a style as you can make it. I don't want it to reveal any part of the watch face or anything else that might give it away." "So you're not actually interested in it as a watch?" "Please, no questions. Just follow my instructions. I want you to leave only the button on top of the watch sticking out through a hole. Everything else should be covered. Then paint the whole box with black lacquer." "So the watch itself doesn't have to be visible?" "That's right. I'm interested only in the sound," Hanio explained patiently. The man proceeded to knock up a rough and ready box, into which the stopwatch was fitted, the button sticking out through a small hole. Black lacquer was then slapped over the coarse-grained wood. It was impossible to tell what it held, but when you pushed the button, a distinct tick-tock could be felt vibrating against the sides. "At last, a defensive weapon," Hanio whispered to himself. It was rather bulky to insert into his jacket pocket, but Hanio put it there nevertheless, feeling a little easier now that he had it. Whenever he pressed the button, he would feel the second hand start to make that emphatic ticking sound in his pocket. "Even if I come to a place like this, in the back of beyond, they'll sniff me out. There's no getting away from them." Hanio had determined it was time to stop running. It was not that he had lost all sense of fear, but the days passed without incident. Every morning when he awoke, it felt wonderful to still be alive, and he was relieved that those spider fantasies never reappeared. Now, hikers often passed in front of Hanno Station, but it was rare to see one from overseas. One day when Hanio went to the station to buy some cigarettes, a refined, white-haired foreigner in his 40s politely removed his green Tyrolean hat and asked him for directions. He was dressed in plaid knickerbockers. "Could you possibly tell me where Mount Rakan is?" "Mount Rakan? Go past the Chamber of Commerce and turn right. When you get to the police station, take a left. Once you've passed the town hall, Mount Rakan should come into view." He was already giving directions, like a local. "I see. Thank you. Look, I'm terribly sorry, but I'd be so grateful if you could accompany me, at least till I get my bearings. I'm hopeless with directions. I'd really appreciate it." With nothing else to occupy him, Hanio decided to act as guide to this affable-looking gentleman. The foreigner looked up at the ski. "Good feether, isn't it?" "I think you mean weether." Hanio's bonhomie even extended to correcting his words. The side of the Chamber of Commerce was in shade at this time of day, and 2 or 3 cars were parked by it. One of them was black, clearly a foreign car, and beautifully polished. What a great car! The foreigner seemed at first just to caress it as he passed by, but then, Casually, he opened one of the back doors. Hanio couldn't believe his eyes. "Get in," the foreigner ordered in a low, rough voice. He held a pistol in his hand. As the car sped off, Hanio was still having his hands cuffed and a pair of sunglasses thrust over his eyes. The sunglasses were stylish. They were fitted with small triangular lenses on either side, which should have meant that even when you looked sideways, you still saw through darkened glass. But Hanio could see nothing. Despite their ordinary appearance, these sunglasses were painted with mercury on the inside. In effect, Hanio had been blindfolded. No doubt this was to keep him ignorant of the destination. The man in the alpine hat was at the steering wheel, but he and Hanio were not alone. As soon as Hanio was bundled into the back, another man had sat up abruptly and stuck the glasses on him. The man now held the muzzle of a gun pressed into his side. Hanio hadn't had time to take in his facial features. There was silence as the car drove along. "Where will I be killed?" Hanio wondered. Some light jazz on the car radio was all he could hear. He found it very difficult to gather together any real thoughts. The moment he'd put out that life for sale ad, he had already sealed his own fate. A violent death. No getting away from it. This unadulterated, raw realization cut through him like searing heartburn. And yet, to his surprise, the fear he'd felt while on the run had suddenly receded. What exactly was the fear of death? All the time, Hanio had felt pursued by death. His eyes were etched with nothing but fear, no matter how many times he'd tried to look away. Fear had been like a strange black chimney rising high up on the horizon. But now, that chimney had disappeared from sight. Once he'd had his stitches removed at a surgery in Hanno, the pain in his thigh had completely disappeared. But he still remembered what a source of worry that pain had been. People tend to be most terrified by the inexplicable. Fear seems to fade when a possible solution arises. The man checked Hanio's hands several times over, as if he were nervous about whether they were securely handcuffed. Hanio could tell from the hairy knuckles that the man was a foreigner. He was also aware of the body odor emanating through his clothes. A gaseous smell, redolent of chives, but somehow powerfully sweet. It could only belong to a Westerner. At first, Hanio intended to calculate calmly the number of times the car turned left, the point at which it emerged onto asphalt-covered roads, and the number of level crossings it passed. But he soon realized that such an exercise was futile. If the drive had been short, he could have mustered a guess, but the car kept going for more than 2 hours. Considering how many paved roads they took during that period, it did not seem particularly likely that they were planning to take him deep into the mountains, shoot him dead, and dispose of his body at the bottom of a ravine. They might well be on their way to Tokyo. After some time, the car ran along a bumpy road, making it roll badly from side to side, and then went up a rather steep incline. He could feel that the wind had picked up. It was growing dark. When the car finally came to a halt, he became aware that the anxiety he felt was less about being killed and more about how long they would keep him waiting before they did so. Hanio was made to get out of the car, walk along a gravelled path, and enter a house. He felt carpet under his feet, a sure sign that the house was a Western one. Hanio seemed to be in a basement room. The room had a cold, bare, concrete floor, and they made him sit down on a chair, hands bound in front of him. The chair was one of several that were placed in a row in front of a simple table. His dark glasses were removed. 6 men were in the room with him, counting the 2 who had ridden with him in the car. The other 4 were all people he recognized. 3 were the Westerners present at the drug experiment using beetle extract. Today, the elderly Henry was without his dachshund. The 4th was that middle-aged, shady Asian man, Ruriko's patron, wearing that unforgettable beret. He looked just like he did before, even to the point of carrying a large sketchbook, The man, complete with comical beret, offered Hanio a cigarette and then was good enough to light it for him. He sat himself down in the next chair. The other men, some sitting on chairs, some standing, all looked hard at Hanio. The two who had been his companions in the car had guns pointed toward him, as if ready to fire at a moment's notice. Right, let's start the interrogation. The Asian spoke in a strangely warm drawl, which reverberated deeply. First, I would appreciate it if you were to confess here and now that you are a police officer. Hanio was dumbfounded. This was the last thing he expected. How can I be a police officer? Look, you can use all the fancy words you like. One way or another, you'll end up confessing it. Do you get me? Okay, I think the quickest way is probably for me to explain why we haven't disposed of you until now, but left you to your own devices. So that's where I'll begin. I prefer persuasive, peaceful methods. I leave the killing to others. When your life for sale advertisement first came out in the newspaper, I thought it was fishy, so I got an old man, one of our stooges, to go to your place. I should introduce him to you. He's been dying to meet you too. He clapped his hands, creating a sound that made the whole room resound like thunder. Come on, where are you? An old man came into the room through a second door. He acknowledged Hanio with a silent nod from a distance, making a hissing sound through his teeth. My apologies, he said. This polite tone seemed to irritate the Asian. That's enough of that. Still, tonight I'm looking forward to sketching our young Hanio as he meets his end. That's why I've brought my sketchbook with me. I want to draw you in various positions, so I'm hoping you'll adopt all sorts of poses as you die, writhing about in excruciating pain. I'm sure you can understand where I'm coming from. The ad that you posted came to our attention because we had become aware that our organization was the object of a secret police investigation, even though we knew very little beyond that basic fact. We were naturally drawn to you because we thought we might have a chance of getting to the bottom of it all if we used someone like you, working undercover, and apparently with so little regard for yourself that you were willing to put out a weird ad like that. So, we first put you together with Ruriko. Ruriko already knew too much about the organization. The way things were, we couldn't be sure how much she might spill the beans to other people about the ACS. That's why we intended to bump her off at the earliest opportunity. So, once we'd introduced her to you, we got rid of her. We thought that would definitely get you to make contact with your colleagues in the police. But you didn't fall for it. We couldn't believe how smart you were. You were too cautious for our liking. By allowing you to return home alive after your visit to her, our intention was to get a sense of how you gathered information and made your reports. We had, of course, taken a secret photograph of your face. Here, this sketchbook doubles as a camera. Take a look. The man showed Hanio. The cover had a stylish design with the two O's in the word sketchbook as two eyes, one wide open, the other shut. In the centre of the open eye was a lens. The cover was awfully thick, it had to be said. But you played dumb and made no contact at all with the police. We began to wonder what you were up to that time you had dinner with the stuffed mouse, but we checked it out later and failed to find any transmitter inside it. The skill with which you avoided giving yourself away was quite masterful, amazing. We then decided to use a second woman, another one of our stooges. We'd pinned our hopes on her, expecting her to use all her wiles to extract the truth out of you. But then the old bag managed to fall head over heels in love with you instead, and got herself wasted instead of you. It's always a bit of a problem how to dispose of the corpses, but with suicides, it can be a little easier. After consultation with Henry here and the other guys, we decided to let you go once more and give you a bit more space to play around in. Sooner or later, we knew we'd have to bump you off, but for now we wanted you to act as a decoy to lure some more police spies into our trap. But you were ever the clever guy. You never let down your guard. And then you went and hitched up with that vampire woman. At that point, we were on the verge of deciding that you must just be a complete wacko with some kind of a death wish, and that we'd obviously been mistaken. The whole thing had become so absurd, we could only hope that the vampire woman would suck you dry of blood as soon as possible and finish you off that way. That would have suited us down to a T. But that's not what happened, is it? You really put your life on the line going undercover as deeply as that. What a stellar spy you are. And then, what did you do? We know exactly, don't we? You made a brilliant show of suffering from dizzy fits due to anemia so you could get yourself admitted to the hospital. And while you were in there, we relaxed and slackened our surveillance, and all the time you got on with your main job. No, that's total and utter. Hanio tried to remonstrate. Don't try to deny it. You see, the ACS works closely with Country B. Ever since that code-breaking incident with the carrots, Country B has kept your name on their list as a Japanese police spy. You did some good work in that department, but that was your downfall. You ended up exposing yourself for what you really were. Everything was revealed. Everything. You stupid piece of shit. Smiling gently, the Asian pushed the sharpened tip of his pencil against Hanio's throat. After that, we decided we wanted to investigate what your colleagues were up to. The best option would be to kidnap you immediately, extract your confession, and kill you. But by then, we'd taken our eyes off the ball and lost track of you. We were in big trouble. We couldn't leave things like that. We'd be compromised. At least, that's the way we saw it. Incidentally, that photo I took of you was invaluable. We made a huge number of duplicates from it. We had a good idea you'd start visiting your old haunts again in Shinjuku. So we got an LSD dealer who works on the fringes of the organization to distribute your picture and see if he came up with anything. He did the rounds asking all the bad girls to see if they knew the odd man in the photo who'd put a life for sale ad in the newspaper. But he didn't find one who could tell him. You've slept with quite a few of the girls, but you're careful. Even those you have slept with had no idea of your present whereabouts. You'd moved out of your apartment. With a population of 10 million, searching for a person in Tokyo is enough to make you throw your hands up in despair. There you were, someone who knew all about the ACS, hopping about like a flea somewhere in the city, and we had no idea how to catch you. But, my dear Hanio, it turns out that there are gods in the world, and the gods never abandon us. These gods love it when people create secret organizations, and in their infinite mercy they apply themselves in various ways on our behalf. The ACS has its roots in Hongbang in China, and it was the local god of that district who helped us now. The name of this god is Great Ancestor Hongjun. Perhaps you've heard of him? During the Taiping Rebellion, a man called Lin was a commander in the army of General Zheng Guofan, which had gone to Yangzhou in order to quell the rebels. Lin was not very good in the ways of war. Every time he led an army of thousands into battle, he lost. General Zheng was so enraged that Lin ended up being sentenced to death. Terrified for his life, Lin absconded with 18 men under his command. They ran and ran. Eventually they found an old mausoleum where they settled down for the night. After a while they heard sounds outside. A large group of people seemed to be closing in. Thinking the end was near, they took up their weapons and stood at the ready. But then it turned out the crowd was not after their blood. They were just local villagers. These villagers told them, just now there was a big noise in the village. When we came out to look, a huge fire dragon was rolling about in the sky with its red flame lighting up the whole area as if it were daytime. Suddenly it dived into the mausoleum. Convinced that some venerable personage must be staying here, we came to see. Lin was relieved and asked the name of the village. He was astonished to hear it was a humble hamlet some 15 or 1600 miles away from the encampment that they had deserted earlier. In the space of a few hours, they had managed to escape this far. It was entirely thanks to divine assistance. In a framed picture hanging from the gate, he saw the inscription Hongjun Mausoleum. It would appear that their savior was great ancestor, Hongjun. The following day, they put together 3 gifts of fragrant candles, paper, and cloth respectively, along with water mixed with wine, and made an offering before the god. After that, they all became virtuous bandits, robbing the rich and passing their wealth on to the poor. This is how it all started in Hongbang. I've digressed a bit, but I wanted to show how we came to worship that deity. And then the old guy happened to bump into you in a local park. Everything worked out fine in the end. We were able then to put a tracking device on you. It's exactly as he says. The old man nodded politely, looking as dapper as ever. Then he gave another glance toward Hanio with an apologetic expression. I can see how it makes total sense to you, but I'm telling you, I have no connection with the police. Hanio remonstrated. You have this paranoid superstition that everyone is a member of some organization. But all your talk about Hongbang is ridiculous. You really ought to get over it. In this world, people also exist who are unattached to any organization, who can live freely and die freely. Go ahead, say whatever you like while you can still talk, said the Asian. And anyway, even Japanese police spies can say some sensible things. I'm fully aware they educate the police to quite an impressive level. But I haven't finished yet. After you removed the transceiver we shot into your thigh, you'd outwitted us again, and we didn't know what to do. You're a real Houdini. You might have put your life up for sale, but you know, I've never seen a man who cares for his life as much as you do. At least until tonight. Can you guess how we knew you'd come to Hanno? We run travel companies that gather information on all traditional inns throughout Japan. We look after the guests at the inns, and in turn we gather information on them. My own travel company looks after its customers well, with a good reputation for excellent service, and the inns appreciate it a lot. The payback is that if some guest stays for a suspiciously long time, we get to know about it straight away. We checked each inn in every region of Japan. We looked into the circumstances of every long-term guest, roughly your age, who was staying alone. Bit by bit we tightened the noose, until finally we worked out you must be the guy staying in the hotel by Hanno Station. And we were right. What a stroke of luck. Now, if we can catch a spy like you and bump you off after you've squealed, every other organization will be sure to reward us for it. No wonder everyone here today is so keen. All these foreigners are crazy about money. Okay, I've got some questions. How many other police intelligence officers are investigating the ACS? Where do they operate? What are their activities? And how do they keep in contact with each other? Hanio suddenly remembered the black box in his pocket. He was pinning all his hopes on the apologetic expression in the old man's eyes. I understand. Hanio nodded. So, you're going to torture me to get information? Exactly. And I'll also be getting some nice sketches at my leisure. I might put them together with the ones I made of you in action with Ruriko, and put on an informal private exhibition at some point. I think it would make an artistic, sensitive show. After all, it's only natural that people are born, love each other, and die. May I ask what you will do if I decide to kill myself before the torture begins? Are you going to bite your tongue off? No, I'll be taking the whole lot of you with me. Hanio placed his hands, still bound with rope, on his jacket pocket, felt for the black box, and pressed the top of the stopwatch. A discernible tick-tock started up. You can hear that, can't you? The ticking sound. What is it? Suddenly alert, the foreigners all rose from their chairs. Don't even think about pressing the trigger of that gun, warned Hanio. The instant I see you move, I'll press this push-button switch. There'll be an explosion, and you, me, and everyone else will be blown to smithereens. Don't you value your own life? Say that again. I'm the man who put out a life-for-sale ad. Don't for a moment put me in the same bag as all those other gutless spies. The bomb is now timed to go off in 8 minutes. But if I press the button, it will detonate immediately. It'll blow this room apart. No problem. Everyone tiptoed back, gingerly. Care for a look? Hanio took out the sinister black box to show them. This was the moment of truth. The box continued to tick away, sure and steady. "Hey, wait! Don't you value your own life?" repeated the Asian. "Fuck that. I'm going to be tortured and killed in any case. What's the difference?" "No. Wait a moment. There is a way your life can be saved." "What do you mean?" "Quickly then. Spit it out. There are only 7 minutes left. Become a member. We can discuss remuneration. We'll make it worth your while. So long as you don't disclose anything, you'll get social status, luxuries, women, everything you could need. Hanio, my boy. Don't, Hanio, my boy me. I don't want to join your stinking gang. As for myself, I lack any sense of morality, so I have no moral objections about what you do. It's all the same to me whether you kill people, or smuggle money or drugs or weapons." He was pretty sure no one would do anything flashy like take potshots at him from behind. He cut through the garden shrubs, got a foothold on the wall and climbed straight over. Then he clambered down a bluff in a blind rush. On the way down, he caught sight of lights flickering in the distance. He was surrounded by darkness, but a town lay just below. It seemed that the house was not exactly in an isolated mountain retreat. He ran through the town, his body covered in bruises, shouting, "Help! Where's the police station?" He ran, staggering, with both hands still bound. People he almost bumped into took fright and moved out of his way. They ignored him totally. Finally, he heard someone shout in response, "There's a police station on the right, over there." In the station, Hanio slumped to the floor, breathless, unable to speak. The middle-aged duty officer turned to look at him, bemused. "Where have you come from?" the man asked calmly. "Oh, your hands are tied together, and you're injured." Where am I?" "Ohm," the officer replied. He returned to his work. "Water. Please give me water. You want water, do you? One moment." The officer still continued leafing through his ledger. He finally laid down his old-fashioned fountain pen, put the cap on with care, and stood up. With one more glance at Hanio, he went to fetch some water. He showed no sign that he was about to untie him. Hanio held up the cup of water, which brimmed with light, in both hands, and then drained it dry. He never imagined anything in the world could taste so delicious. The officer stole yet another look at Hanio's hands. He was probably apprehensive about what Hanio might try to do once he was freed. Hanio, with some reasoning power left, resisted the temptation to request that he be untied. There would be plenty of time later to complain about police negligence to a detective. No sooner had this thought crossed Hanio's mind than the officer made a great fuss of untying his hands. Hanio realized his fears were groundless. "What happened to you?" the officer asked, as if he were reproaching a son who had come home later than expected. "I almost got killed." The officer did not sound convinced. "What do you mean, you almost got killed?" Slowly, deliberately, he removed the cap from the fountain pen, took out a sheet of roof paper from the drawer, and began to write. He was dreadfully slow at writing. "Welcome to the station. Okay, shall we take your written statement? This way, please." He looked as if he had just finished dinner, as he repeatedly poked at his teeth with a toothpick. Hanio wondered if he should ask for a meal himself, but he was not at all hungry. "Right then, in your own time. Let's begin with your name and address." "I am of no fixed address." "Oh." The detective glanced at Hanio. He did not look pleased. His manner of speaking gradually changed. "Now, both your hands were tied up, weren't they?" "Yes." You do know it's possible to tie up your own hands, if you do it with your teeth. This isn't a joke. I almost got killed just now. That's terrible. Now you say you came running down to the town, but where did you start running from? From a residence on a bluff. If that's the area, it must be the bluff on the north side of town. I haven't any idea whether it's north or south. The chairman of K Industries has a fancy home around there, and it's quite a smart residential street. You don't happen to know which house it was? I didn't have time to read the nameplate. Okay, forget that. Just give me the main details. A long, tortuous conversation ensued. When Hanio started to race away with his story, the detective would raise his hand to motion him to speak more slowly. ACS. What's that? The Asia Confidential Service. Asia Confidential Service. Is that a petroleum company or something? It's an organization that specializes in smuggling and murder. Got you. There were traces of a smile on the detective's lips. What evidence do you have for saying that? I witnessed it with my own eyes. You actually saw murder take place? No, I'm not saying I saw it. How can you know if you didn't see it? I'm sure you are familiar with the case of that woman, Ruriko Kishi. Her body was found floating in the Sumida River. We knew each other. Ruriko, Kishi. What character do you write Kishi with? The same character that Prime Minister Kishi uses in his name. The Kishi from Prime Minister Kishi. Got it. She must have been a lovely woman. Was her corpse completely naked? I believe it was. You're saying you didn't see that either? I certainly saw her naked. In a nutshell, you had a physical relationship with her. That's got nothing to do with it. She was killed by the ACS. Listen, young man. The detective suddenly put on an officious face and looked Hanio directly in the eye. You keep mentioning the ACS, but do you have any proof that it actually exists? I won't waste my time taking down your statement. You come out with this name, ACS, that no one's ever heard of, claiming it exists. But my long years of experience tell me straight off that this is all a fabrication. The police force isn't here for you to come and tell crazy, made-up stories, you know. You've probably been reading too much weird detective fiction, but if you can't make your story stick, you'll end up getting charged with interference with a public official in the execution of their duties. You're being absurd. What would a policeman in the sticks like you know about it? Take me to the National Police Agency. I'll get a proper hearing from the people there. Oh, I'm so sorry that you've had to deal with a mere underling. But this underling's intuition works a hell of a sight better than that of his superiors, I can tell you. The sticks. What nonsense. You've got nerve for a man of no fixed abode. So everyone without a fixed abode is suspect? Yes, of course. Perhaps afraid that he might have gone too far, the detective softened his tone a little. Respectable people all have homes. They devote themselves to providing for their wives and children. Surely I don't have to tell you that, for someone your age to come here, single and homeless, makes you a dodgy member of society. Are you saying that every person must have an address, a home, a wife, and kids, and a job? It's not me that says it, it's society. So anyone slightly different is human trash. You said it. It's not unusual for lonely men to suffer from delusions and to come rushing into the police station to make false claims about being injured. If you think you're the only one, you're very much mistaken. Oh, really? In which case, you may as well treat me like a proper criminal. I've been involved in a very immoral business. I put my life up for sale. You did? Really? Boy, that must have been tough. But you're just the kind who would do that sort of thing. After all, it's not as if you did anything illegal. It's the one who buys another person's life and uses it for their own nefarious purposes who's the actual criminal. There's nothing criminal about putting your life up for sale. It's just that you just have to be human trash to do such a thing. Hanio felt a distinctly cold sensation pierce his heart. he realized he would have to change tack and throw himself on the detective's mercy. "I'm begging you, please put me in a police cell, even if it's for a few days. Protect me. Someone really is out to get rid of me. I'll definitely get bumped off if some action is not taken. Please, I'm desperate. Don't be ridiculous. We're not a hotel, you know. From now on, just put aside your stupid ACS delusions." The detective took a sip of his tea, by now quite cold, and turned aside in silence. Hanio made one more tearful plea, but the policeman would have nothing of it. In the end, they threw him out through the front entrance of the station. He was all alone. It was a glorious starry night. In a dark alley opposite the station, he could see 2 or 3 red paper lanterns, probably signalling the local police watering hole. Night clung to Hanio's heart. It smothered his face, as if about to suffocate him. Hanio could not manage even the few stone steps at the station entrance, so he sat himself down where he was. He took a bent cigarette from his trouser pocket and lit it. He was on the verge of tears, and a kind of twitching troubled the back of his throat. He looked up into the heavens, the stars blurred, and a myriad of lights blended into one.